a lot of people think empaths are weak because they feel everything deeply. But psychology tells a completely different story. The empath personality often becomes most dangerous later in life, not because they suddenly change into someone else, but because age teaches them something most people never learn: how to feel deeply without being controlled by emotion. That combination creates a person who is almost impossible to manipulate. Here's a powerful YouTube psychology script in a Chase Hughes-inspired style. Most empaths spend the first half of life surviving emotional chaos they don't even understand. As children, they absorb tension from the room before words are spoken. They notice facial expressions nobody else sees, tone shifts, energy changes, micro-behaviors. Psychologists call this heightened emotional sensitivity, but growing up with that ability is rarely peaceful. Because the empath learns early that other people's emotions invade their nervous system like smoke filling a house, and when you're young, you don't know the difference between your feelings and everyone else's. That confusion creates a painful paradox. Empaths become experts at understanding while completely losing themselves. Research in neuroscience suggests highly sensitive people show stronger activation in brain regions connected to empathy, awareness, and emotional processing. Their brains literally process social information more deeply. That sounds like a gift, until you realize what it costs. Because while everyone else walks through life emotionally armored, the empath walks through life with exposed nerves. And for years, this creates weakness instead of strength. They attract narcissists, controllers, emotionally unstable people. Why? Because manipulative personalities instinctively recognize emotional availability. Predators don't hunt strength first. They hunt access. And young empaths give emotional access too freely. They overhelp, over-explain, over-forgive. Not because they're stupid, because they genuinely feel the pain of others. But eventually something changes, usually after betrayal, burnout, emotional exhaustion, or repeated psychological trauma. The empath reaches a breaking point, and this is where the transformation begins, because pain forces pattern recognition. Over time, the empath starts noticing the same emotional behaviors repeating across different people: the guilt tactics, the fake apologies, the manipulation cycles. Most empaths don't begin life looking powerful. They begin life overwhelmed. Before they even understand language, they are already reading emotion. A slammed door feels like danger. A forced smile feels terrifying. Silence feels loud. While other children forget emotional moments quickly, the empath's nervous system stores them like scars burned into memory. Psychologists have discovered that highly sensitive individuals process emotional stimuli more deeply inside the brain. Research using fMRI scans shows stronger activation in regions connected to awareness, empathy, and emotional meaning. In simple terms, the empath brain does not merely notice emotion, it absorbs it, and that changes everything. Because growing up emotionally sensitive in a harsh world is like walking through a battlefield without armor. The average person experiences conflict and moves on. The empath relives it for years. A single betrayal can echo inside their nervous system long after everyone else forgets it happened. That's why so many empaths grow up feeling different without understanding why. They become the emotional shock absorbers of families, the peacekeepers, the listeners, the emotional caretakers. And here's the tragedy. Most empaths are praised for self-sacrifice long before they learn self-protection. They become addicted to helping because helping temporarily gives them emotional safety. If everyone else is okay, maybe they'll finally feel okay too. But psychology warns us about something dangerous called emotional contagion. This is the brain's tendency to unconsciously absorb the emotions of people nearby. Studies show stress hormones like cortisol can rise simply from exposure to emotionally distressed people. The empath experiences this constantly, not occasionally, constantly. Their nervous system becomes overloaded for years without rest. And over time, that emotional overload changes the body itself. Chronic stress exposure has been linked to sleep disorders, weakened immunity, anxiety, digestive problems, inflammation, and even accelerated aging. Think about that. The empath isn't too emotional. Their body is physically carrying the weight of emotional environments other people barely notice. But this is where, regarding the transformation secretly begins. Pain creates pattern recognition. At first, the empath trusts everyone. They believe honesty exists because they themselves are honest. But repeated emotional injuries start teaching the brain something powerful. Not everyone deserves access to your empathy. And once the empath learns this lesson, their entire psychology changes. Neuroscience shows the brain adapts to repeated experiences through neuroplasticity. Every betrayal, every manipulation, every emotional wound, it reshapes perception. Over time, the empath develops heightened awareness not because life was easy, but because survival demanded it. They start recognizing emotional patterns before words are even spoken. The fake concern, the subtle guilt tactics, the performative kindness. What once hurt them now educates them. And this is why older empaths often become incredibly difficult to deceive. They've spent decades studying human behavior without realizing it. Not in classrooms, in survival. That experience becomes a psychological superpower. Research in behavioral science suggests humans communicate far more through nonverbal signals than spoken language. Micro-expressions, voice tension, eye movement, facial asymmetry. Most people miss these cues. Empaths don't, because years of emotional hypervigilance trained their brain to scan for danger automatically. And hypervigilance, while painful in youth, often evolves into advanced social intuition later in life. The empath who once felt cursed by sensitivity slowly realizes something shocking. Their pain sharpened perception. That changes how they move through the world. When they're young, empaths react emotionally to manipulation. They explain themselves, defend themselves, over-apologize. But later in life, something colder emerges, calm observation. And psychologically, observation is one of the highest forms of power. Because the person who observes emotional patterns without reacting emotionally becomes almost impossible to control. Manipulative people rely on emotional reactions: anger, guilt, fear, confusion. But older empaths stop feeding emotional chaos. They pause instead. They watch. And silence becomes devastating. Behavioral experts often say the strongest person in a negotiation is the one most comfortable with silence. Empaths eventually learn this, naturally, not because they wanted power, but because exhaustion forced wisdom upon them. After enough emotional pain, they realize reacting impulsively only gives toxic people more control, so they stop reacting. And the moment that happens, their entire energy changes. People begin feeling strangely intimidated around them. Not because the empath became aggressive, because emotional self-control creates psychological presence. Humans instinctively respect calm nervous systems. A person who remains emotionally steady under pressure appears powerful on a primal level, and older empaths often develop exactly that. Not through confidence seminars, through survival. But perhaps the biggest transformation happens internally. Young empaths often confuse love with sacrifice. They believe enduring pain proves loyalty. So they tolerate disrespect for years, hoping compassion will change people. But research on narcissistic and manipulative personality traits reveals something disturbing. Highly empathetic individuals are often specifically targeted because they are more forgiving and emotionally accommodating. Predatory personalities search for emotional access. And empaths give too much of it away, until one day, the empath breaks. Not dramatically, quietly. And that quiet breaking point becomes the beginning of power. Because the empath finally understands a truth most people never learn. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. That realization changes their relationships forever. They stop chasing emotionally unavailable people. They stop explaining their worth. They stop shrinking themselves to keep others comfortable. And for the first time in their life, they begin protecting their peace instead of sacrificing it. Science shows chronic emotional stress can keep the nervous system trapped in fight-or-flight mode for years. But boundaries reduce stress load and improve emotional regulation. In other words, boundaries literally heal the brain and body. That's why older empaths often appear calmer, wiser, and emotionally magnetic. They no longer leak energy trying to save everyone else. And ironically, this is when people become most drawn to them, because emotional balance is rare, especially in a world addicted to chaos. The older empath speaks less, but sees more, feels deeply, but reacts carefully. Ellie loves fully, but tolerates very little disrespect. That combination becomes incredibly powerful. And here's the final truth nobody tells empaths when they are young. Your sensitivity was never the weakness. Your lack of boundaries was. The pain was not meaningless. Every heartbreak trained perception. Every betrayal sharpened awareness. Every emotional wound forced psychological growth. The empath becomes powerful later in life because life itself becomes their training ground. And after surviving years of emotional chaos, they develop something terrifyingly rare. The ability to understand human emotion deeply without drowning inside it. That is not weakness. That is evolution. Most people spend their entire lives listening to words. Empaths listen to what leaks out between the words. The trembling voice pretending to sound confident. The fake smile hiding resentment. The forced laugh covering insecurity. And while the average person misses these signals completely, the empath notices them instantly. But this ability does not appear fully formed. It is built through years of emotional exposure. Years of watching people say, "I'm fine," while radiating pain. Yay. Hours of hearing apologies that felt emotionally empty. Years of sensing danger before evidence appeared. At first, this sensitivity feels like a curse. Because young empaths absorb emotion faster than they understand it. They walk into a room and suddenly feel exhausted without knowing why. One tense conversation can drain their nervous system for hours. Science may explain why. Research in neuroscience suggests highly sensitive individuals process emotional and social stimuli more deeply inside regions of the brain associated with awareness and emotional meaning. Their brains react stronger to subtle human behavior most people ignore. This means the empath is not imagining emotional tension. Their nervous system is literally detecting more information. And over time, that constant exposure transforms the empath into something psychologically rare. A human lie detector. Not because they read minds, because they recognize patterns. Behavioral psychologists often explain that humans reveal internal emotions through micro-expressions, facial reactions lasting less than half a second. These expressions are almost impossible to fake consistently. Fear flashes across the east. Yes. Disgust tightens the mouth. Contempt appears for milliseconds. Most people never notice these signals consciously. Empaths do, especially later in life, because pain trained their observation. Think about what happens after decades of betrayal, manipulation, disappointment, and emotional chaos. The empath brain adapts for survival. It begins scanning for emotional inconsistencies automatically. And this creates something powerful. The ability to detect when energy and language do not match. Someone says they love you, but their behavior feels cold. Someone claims honesty, but their nervous system looks defensive. Someone smiles, while their eyes show anger. Older empaths notice these contradictions immediately, and psychology supports this phenomenon. Studies on nonverbal communication suggest humans communicate emotional states far more through tone, posture, facial movement, and behavior than through actual words. Words are controlled, emotion leaks, and empaths become experts at spotting the leaks. That is why many older empaths seem strangely intuitive. But what people call intuition is often accelerated pattern recognition. The subconscious brain RBs millions of behavioral details faster than conscious thought can process them. This process is sometimes called thin slicing, the ability to make accurate judgments from limited exposure. Research shows humans can often form surprisingly accurate impressions of personality within seconds. Empaths take this ability to another level because they spend their entire lives emotionally studying people. Without realizing it, they become behavioral analysts. Every toxic relationship sharpens the skill. Every fake friendship improves detection. Every manipulator accidentally trains the empath to recognize manipulation faster next time. And eventually something shocking happens. The empath who once trusted too easily becomes almost impossible to fool. Not cynical. Aware, there is a difference. Because older empaths stop listening only to words. They study consistency. Consistency is where truth lives. Anyone can perform kindness briefly. Anyone can fake charm temporarily. but maintaining emotional congruence over time is extremely difficult. Empaths learn to watch patterns instead of promises, and this changes everything about their relationships. Suddenly they not. We ice how certain people only call when they need something. How fake empathy disappears when attention is not returned. How guilt becomes a tool used by emotionally manipulative personalities. The empath begins seeing emotional transactions everywhere, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. This awareness also changes how older empaths handle conflict. Young empaths often react emotionally because they desperately want understanding. They explain too much, defend too much, feel too much. But later in life, they realize something devastating. Some people misunderstand you on purpose. That realization creates emotional restraint, and restraint is power. Because the person who controls emotional reactions controls the interaction. Behavioral experts often say emotional regulation is one of the strongest predictors of psychological resilience. Why? Because calm nervous systems think clearly under pressure. While others panic, react, or lash out, the older empath watches quietly. That silence unsettles manipulative people, because manipulators survive by provoking emotional reactions. They need anger, fear, confusion, guilt. But when the empath stays calm, the manipulator loses leverage. And this is why many older empaths suddenly appear intimidating despite being deeply compassionate people. They no longer react impulsively. They observe strategically. Their emotional intelligence evolves into social intelligence. That evolution makes them incredibly difficult to control. But there's another reason older empaths become powerful observers. Trauma changes attention. Studies suggest people exposed to repeated emotional stress often develop heightened sensitivity to behavioral threat cues. At unhealthy levels, this becomes hypervigilance. But when managed properly, it evolves into advanced situational awareness. The empath notices shifts instantly. The room gets quieter. Someone's tone changes. A smile becomes forced. Energy tightens. Their nervous system reacts before conscious logic catches up. This is why older empaths often sense betrayal before proof exists. Their subconscious mind already detected inconsistencies. And science confirms the human brain constantly processes hidden environmental information below conscious awareness. The empath simply becomes better at listening to those signals. But here is the painful truth before. In this ability, most empaths paid for this wisdom with suffering. No one develops deep human awareness without emotional scars. The empath learned people by surviving people. That is why older empaths often become emotionally selective. Not cold, protective. Because they finally understand proximity matters. Who you spend time around shapes your nervous system, your stress hormones, your emotional stability, even your physical health. Studies show toxic stress increases inflammation, damages sleep quality, weakens immunity, and affects long-term mental health. The empath eventually realizes energy is not just spiritual language. It is neurological reality. Some people drain your body. Others heal it. And older empaths become incredibly careful about who receives access to them. This is why they often appear quieter later in life. Not because they lost emotion, because they stopped wasting it. And that silence hides enormous psychological strength. The older empath may speak softly, but internally they are analyzing everything. Behavior, consistency, motives, emotional timing, not to manipulate others, to protect peace. And perhaps that is the greatest formation of all. The empath who once drowned in emotional chaos becomes the calmest person in the room. Not because life became easier, because experience taught them how human behavior really works. They understand masks, projection, emotional manipulation, false vulnerability, performative kindness. And once a person sees beneath the surface of human behavior, they can never fully go back to innocence again. But in that loss of innocence, something powerful is born. Clarity. The older empath no longer needs everyone to like them. They no longer chase validation, because they already see the truth most people hide. And when someone understands human nature deeply while remaining emotionally disciplined, their presence alone becomes powerful. Not loud power, quiet power, the kind that sees everything long before anyone else notices it. For most of their life, the empath believes love means sacrifice. They believe loyalty means enduring pain quietly. So they overgive, overforgive, overextend. And the terrifying part is society rewards them for it. People praise the empath for being selfless. But psychology often sees something much darker happening under the surface. Because when a person constantly ignores their own emotional needs to protect everyone else's feelings, the nervous system begins collapsing under invisible pressure. Research shows chronic emotional stress can elevate cortisol levels for years. And elevated cortisol has been linked to anxiety, fatigue, weakened immunity, digestive disorders, insomnia, memory problems, and even accelerated aging. Think about that. The empath who keeps everyone emotionally safe is often silently destroying their own body. But young empaths rarely notice this damage at first. Why? Because they confuse emotional exhaustion with love. They think being needed means being valued. So they tolerate behavior that slowly breaks them psychologically. Manipulation, guilt, emotional inconsistency, one-sided relationships. And because empaths naturally feel the pain of others so deeply, they often excuse behavior that other people would walk away from immediately. That's why emotionally manipulative personalities are drawn toward them. Studies involving narcissistic behavioral traits suggest manipulative individuals often seek highly empathetic people because empathy increases tolerance. In simple language, the empath stays longer, forgives faster, questions themselves instead of questioning toxic behavior. And over time,